All right, welcome everyone to Max Love Project and the Cure Starts Now webinar on dietary and lifestyle changes, applications for pediatric brain tumors as presented at the DIPG DMG Symposium this year. In this webinar, Alexia Hall and I will be touching on dietary and lifestyle changes for children and families diagnosed with a pediatric brain tumor. Alexia is going to be an amazing addition in presenting this information compared to the in-person conference in May as a registered dietitian and walking us through the new and innovative science and tools of nutrigenomic counseling, while I'll be focusing in on ketosis and uses of ketogenic diets with kiddos. To begin, a little information about me. I will say I'm not a dietitian or certified anything really, but am mom to Camila, who battled DIPG for almost 4 years. Right now, as I work as content manager for Max Love Project, which is the nonprofit organization that specializes in culinary medicine and supporting children and families inside and outside of the hospital, and was the organization that helped me immensely as we instituted some of these tools that we'll be presenting today at home for Camila. My role is based on translating expertise from professionals into parent-centered programs and workshops to help parents feel empowered and a part of their child's care team. When Camila was diagnosed, I felt very passionately about supporting her whole body and well-being and not only focusing on attacking her tumor. I was told that Camila wouldn't have the lifespan of my other 2 kids, so a heavy focus for our family was to make sure the days she did have were the best that they could be. Focusing in on the quality of life for Camila and myself and our family showed us more ways that we should look into supporting these children, these families as they face the unimaginable, which is in some of the information we will present to you today. I will now hand it over to Lexi for her little introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexia Hall, and I'm a clinical dietitian, and I get the pleasure of working with Sam at Max Love Project. I have an additional credential in integrative and functional nutrition, and I also obtained a nutrigenomics counselor certificate from 3x4 Nutrigenomics, a company that I do a lot of business with. And I am lucky enough to run the culinary medicine program at the Southern California portion for Max Love. So happy to be here with you guys today, and so happy to be in this space of culinary medicine with all of you guys.
Thank you, Lexi. And just a little agenda, a brief snapshot on what we're going to be covering today. We will touch on quality of life. Quality of life and lifestyle changes are so much more than diet. We'll touch on that briefly. And I will be covering ketosis and the ketogenic diet for pediatric brain tumor patients and dive into what ketosis is, what are ketones, how ketosis can help, and introduce you to some of the resources that are readily available to you today. And Lexi is going to be giving you an intro level discussion into Max Love Project's pilot program, which personalized nutrition, which is around the science of nutrigenomics and working with your child's epigenetics to cater culinary medicine and supplementation to your child's body. And then we can end the webinar with a little Q&A. So a diagnosis like brain cancer for your child completely disorients a family and forces you to realize how precious each day is. Quality of life and the moments, minutes, seconds of each day truly matter on this journey, and there are many important actions we can focus on to make all of these moments the best that they can be. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, the whole family needs to be supported as they trek this journey. At Max Love, we employ a mindset called the Be Super Action Plan, which is a guide rail to prioritizing quality of life, while also supporting the whole body in the face of childhood cancer. The Be Super Action Plan is rooted in science and research to show and empower that moving towards small actions, actionable goals for your family, like maintaining a healthy age-appropriate sleep schedule, or going on a walk in nature and working towards positive self-talk, can all contribute to enhanced quality of life for the whole family. One of the highest sense of importance on this wheel is the community, having the healthy social support from others who do understand. It is one of the reasons I feel so thankful to be presenting this information to you all today and to be in partnership with the Cure Starts Now and Max Love Project, as this journey is never meant to be walked alone. On the topics we will be speaking on today, I want everyone listening to know, and there are means of support to help you, and you are not alone. So from that Be Super action wheel, Lexi and I are really focusing on the E, which is one of the E's, which is eat super fierce food. So this webinar is really going to be focused on the dietary interventions that you could do to, at the very least, improve quality of life on this journey. So the goal with this action is to focus on whole nutrient-dense foods to support the whole body in the face of cancer. And for me, I'm going to be focusing on right now ketosis and the ketogenic diet. So first, in understanding ketosis, ketosis is a metabolic state that occurs when your body burns fat for fuel instead of glucose or sugar. So the goal with ketosis as a dietary intervention is not to adhere to a specific diet, but to take a bio-individual approach to eating in order to achieve a state of ketosis, which can be done in a variety of ways. Here I've listed various ways that any individual could reach a state of ketosis and burning fat instead of sugar. But here we're talking about kids, right? So according to research as we have now, I've highlighted the 2 ways that are easiest and safest for kids to achieve confirmed levels of ketosis within the blood, which is a high-fat, low-carb, normal to low-protein diet, which is essentially a ketogenic diet, as well as supplementing with exogenous ketones or MCT oil. And when talking about brain tumors, we look at a ketogenic diet and ketones as a tool to moving into this metabolic state. Okay, so what are ketones? Ketones are these molecules that are made when the body breaks down fat for fuel. The body will do this naturally when carbs or sugar is low in the body. The body naturally does this every day, no matter if you're on a ketogenic diet or not, in times of not eating, like overnight when you are sleeping. Most organs and tissues can use these molecules as an alternate energy source, with the brain actually favoring ketones. The 3 ketone bodies created in a state of ketosis are acetone, which are excreted through the breath, acetoacetate, which is produced by liver and excreted through the urine, and then there's beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is our main focus today and what we really look for in a ketogenic diet, as it's the most useful energy source, and that's measured in the blood. Ketones and their powerful energy have made them an emerging area of study for a lot of neurodegenerative diseases, in mental health, and as well as brain tumors and cancer overall. So like I had brought up with kids, a ketogenic diet is the easiest and most well-studied to get those powerful ketones into the blood and used as energy. The ketogenic diet has been used with kids with refractory pediatric epilepsy for over 100 years and has an immense safety profile. The overall goal with a ketogenic diet is to shift those macronutrients, so protein, fat, and carbs, to be high fat, low carb, and adequate protein. So this slide is provided by LJ Amaral over at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, who works with adults and pediatric brain tumor patients and implementing the ketogenic diet for them. This graph at the top shows, what a typical diet in macronutrients would look like. And it just shows how a ketogenic diet is. We're really focusing in on that fat and the shift in macronutrients. So this graph right here is technically a 3-to-1 ratio. So you have you have 3% or 3 fat compared to the 1 carbohydrates to protein. And this is the diet specifically used for pediatric epilepsy or epilepsy patients. There are different variations of the ketogenic diet, including ones with lower percent of fat from calories, because remember, with the goal in brain tumors, the goal is to be simply in a state of ketosis. So that can be different for anybody. And you can use any one of these ratios to achieve that state, and it is all measurable by the ketones in the blood at home monitoring. With Keto for Cancer and the main goal of achieving, so any one of these could work for your child. In order to detect and monitor what is working or not, you would measure at home with blood measurements, or even urine strips at the very least. You can confirm ketosis that way as well. This graph in the corner gives a picture into what those blood measurements at home would look like. So you have out of ketosis. So the, I don't know if anybody, can you see my mouse when I do this? Yeah, okay. So below 0.5 ketones is out of ketosis, 0.5 to 3 is nutritional ketosis, and then the therapeutic levels are from 3 to 7. And then you have the glucose measurements as well. So this is another useful tool. If you were to start a ketogenic diet, you would measure success if after eating or in any time during the day, you would be able to get these numbers based on what the child is eating. In my personal experience with Camila, we hovered between this 2 to 1, even 1 to 1 ratio, and we were able to achieve those therapeutic levels of ketosis, especially when we supplemented with things like MCT oil. It was very achievable, and she was able to maintain that for a long time. So ketosis and ketogenic diet should not be used as a standalone therapy for a brain tumor diagnosis, but it's most effective when in combination with other standard of care therapies. At the DIPG DMG symposium this May, Dr. Adrienne Check gave her amazing talk on her research with DIPG and other pediatric brain tumors like medulloblastoma and ketone bodies using the ketogenic diet. In her slides, she presented an amazing synopsis of research with hers and others showcasing the synergistic effect of ketones, ketogenic diets on some common standard of care treatments used in the pediatric brain tumor population. Briefly, because I'm no scientist, ketosis and ketogenic diets and the molecule BHB, which it remembers one of the ketone bodies that is produced when it's in a state of ketosis, in general, has been shown to help all of these therapies. I can give you a brief snapshot into what they do, and I've also provided links if further research is wanted. But for PI3 kinase inhibitors, being in ketosis and a ketogenic diet actually helps close the insulin feedback loop that drives resistance to the drug in a lot of patients. Radiation, it's one of the most well-studied synergies in sensitizing the cells to radiation and protecting healthy brain cells during treatment. PD-1 inhibitors, which is an immune system inhibitor that is increased efficacy in a study, as well as induced compositional changes in the gut microbiome to aid in those immune surveillance. There's been studies with Avastin and ketogenic diets in glioblastoma models. Beta hydroxybutyrate, the actual ketone body as a molecule, is an HDAC inhibitor, which HDAC inhibitors are a class of drugs researchers have been trying to look into clinical trials, but have unable to move forward because of toxicity with children. And at the symposium as well, it was presented that ONC201, which is a very emerging drug with use in DIPG specifically, ONC201's effects have been enhanced with a molecule called 2DG, which is a drug that inhibits glycolysis and is not available to be used in humans. But the ketogenic diet also inhibits glycolysis. So I think there's also some synergies there that nobody has studied, but it is interesting to see, that some drugs are being more effective when you limit the glycolysis. And then lastly, on top of these enhancing these therapies, ketosis has overall been shown to help protect the healthy cells in the presence of all of these therapies. Therefore, at the very minimum, promoting a general feeling of well-being as well as protecting quality of life. So now that I've summarized some of the whys and whats for kids and ketosis, I want to move into the practicality and how to do this for your child. I would like to stress the importance first of gathering all the resources you can within your institution and clinical team to help support your family in this transition. You can find some support in the neurology clinics, as they do use keto for kids with epilepsy, or perhaps even your oncology dietitian could help. But this is really important to bring up with your team. In response to not all centers having those means of support or expertise, at Max Love Project, within our Max Love Project Connect app, we have created a keto guide, which helps cover topics like what a ketogenic diet is, what does it look like in real life, how do I start, how do I monitor my child, and all of this information is in an accessible e-learning model and peer-reviewed by expert nutritionists. Another tool we have at Max Love Project is a world-class culinary medicine team who work to create nutrient-dense, tasty, kid-friendly recipes for our population of kiddos with cancer and rare diseases. We have all recipes taste tested at our Fierce Foods Academy, which we hold in person in the hospital and online with parents and kids to teach them how to cook and answer any questions they may have. I've pulled some of our keto-friendly recipes that could work for your kid while trying to transition into a ketogenic diet. So yeah, there is a misconception that keto doesn't taste good. But I think Lexi and her team have done an amazing job of pulling together resources and recipes to make that not the case. And here are some pictures of our programs, working with kids at the farm, in the hospital, and at home with our new webinar-based cooking class we began during COVID. Pictured in the top right is Camila eating some avocado pudding and taco avocado boats, presented by the culinary medicine team. Just this year, we also launched our Fierce Foods Kitchen Cookbook, which has ample amounts of recipes with notes and modifications on adjusting macros, ingredients to fit your child's specific needs as well. Quickly, I just want to touch on two different lessons that are in the keto guide in the Max Love Project Connect app that help picture what a ketogenic meal for cancer looks like. We'll first cover the transition to keto with three main goals. If we can, look at what our kid is eating now or how we eat as a family and kind of bring these questions into our awareness, then we could begin thinking about how we could implement a ketogenic diet for our family. And the first is to prioritize the fat. If our new energy source is going to be fat for the body, then fat needs to be ingested, especially for kids who don't have the storage of fat like adults do. We consider high quality fats like MCT oil, olive oil, macadamia nuts, avocados, butter, cream, and coconut oil. And then our second goal that we focus on is presenting carbohydrates in the form of vegetables. In order to get the body to produce these ketones in the liver, carbs and sugars need to be lowered. Hence, we work on also restricting simple and most complex carbs, and instead present carbohydrates on the plate as vegetables. This goal really moves towards our overall goal of eating more vegetables to get that fiber, which is really important on a ketogenic diet, the phytonutrients, minerals, and other important compounds, components to help fight cancer. And then lastly, the third goal is viewing protein as a supplement to the meal. A huge misconception is that keto is a high protein animal-based diet. For cancer, this is not true, and protein should be considered in adequate amounts, as even protein can be moved into glucose by the body. I love how Dr. Nasha Winters puts it as keto for cancer, is saying that it's a plant-based but not animal protein deficient diet. I think that is beautifully said. But yeah, these goals are specific to kids with cancer. We are not doing keto for things like muscle gain or weight loss or anything like that. And that's where some of this misinformation can leak in from. And lastly, I wanted to share an applicable example on how to take a standard meal and move it into a more ketogenic way of eating. I used this tactic a lot when I was cooking for my 3 kids with one eating keto. We all ate very similarly, but Camila needed to have her plate restructured, is how I put it, a bit more to meet the goals that I had just previously mentioned on my other slide. But to use those 3 goals into taking a cheeseburger, into a more ketogenic way of eating. Those steps would be to take off the bun. You don't want to get fries, but instead do some roasted veggies like asparagus, broccoli, or even a side salad. And then you want to focus on adding the fats, and that can be an aioli on the side to dip, oil over the salad, nuts on the salad, or avocado on the side, and then limiting the protein. So adding those veggies and fats will provide satiety and provide more calories from the meal versus protein, because remember that fat has 9 calories per gram, while protein carbs only has 4. So with fat, you do get a lot more of that satiety with fat. So there was just a practical example. And one thing we weren't able to do at the symposium, since Lexi wasn't there, was to take into, some of the complications that could happen with a ketogenic diet, or some things to be mindful of as you're moving into a state of ketosis. So this slide, I'm going to hand over to Lexi to walk through making sure that there's a well-planned keto diet and any dietary interventions we may need as you move forward.
I think everybody can hear me, but I'm not sure if they can see me. Sam, do you know if they can see me?
Yes, I think they can, yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So a well-planned ketogenic diet is just like any other well-planned diet. If we don't think about all the necessary parts to it, it could be deficient in certain vitamins and minerals. And so these are some of the more common things that can happen when somebody is doing an exclusively, as Sam showed previously, an almost 90% fat diet. And so one of the first things that can happen is constipation. The most common causes of constipation is not enough water and not enough fiber and not enough movement. And so by ensuring adequate hydration and making sure you get that source of fiber, that's a really good way to prevent that from happening in the first place. And since you're not doing a whole lot of fruit, you're not doing some of the starchier vegetables, getting some of this fiber from seeds such as flax and chia is a great way to do it. And then as that awesome slide where you had all those numbers, Sam pointed out, that all of your dark green leafy vegetables like the spinach and the lettuces can provide that fiber without contributing to a high carbohydrate content. Some of the kids can develop high cholesterol if they have familial genetics that make eating more saturated fat for them increase their cholesterol. Then we do like to test for that on a regular basis. And if that is the case with your child, then replacing some of those saturated fats with medium chain triglycerides, the MCT oil, and also more of the polyunsaturated fats like the olive oil she pounded out in the dressing is a great way to prevent that. Elevated triglycerides, your body normally makes a molecule called carnitine, and that carnitine helps your body to burn fat. But when you're ramping up into a ketogenic diet, your body also needs to increase the amount of carnitine that it's producing. And so we test you for carnitine deficiency at the very beginning of entering into a ketogenic diet, or ask your team to do that naturally. And some kids just might need to supplement if they are having trouble ramping up really quickly. And carnitine comes naturally from animal sources, so we can give it a supplement form if we have to. There's a couple of nutrients that can be deficient on a not well-planned ketogenic diet, but as you can see there with the vitamin D, the selenium, zinc, the magnesium, there are tons of keto approved type foods that will absolutely work for the diet, but that meet those nutrient needs there too. But that's another list of things that if your child needed to be on the strict form of ketogenic diet for longer than 6 months, we would ask for those nutrients to be assessed as well. And if there needs to be a supplement, we can give a supplement, but if we just want to ramp up on that food first idea, we can do that too.
Awesome. Thank you, Lexi. And
you're very welcome.
I think I just want to end on this note. What is important when considering this type of diet for your child and, everything they're facing and your family's facing. This is kind of the approach that we've taken at Max Love. Is a ketogenic diet approach has the highest potential for success for those cases in a favorable home environments, facing active disease in the form of solid tumors, especially during the time of radiation and chemotherapy. Adopting a dietary change is a big deal. Like we said before, you're not alone. We're here to support, but you do have to go into it knowing that it is an adjustment and you have to look at it more as like you're growing into it. But some families aren't able to have space to do that. So we always want to make sure that, that the home environment is ready to make these changes. As well as in the form of solid tumors, and especially during the time of radiation, chemotherapy, or any other therapies that your child's doing, because like we said, ketogenic and this therapy isn't meant to be a standalone therapy. So yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to stop sharing my screen, Lexi?
Yes, thank you
Okay.
so much for that
You're
presentation,
welcome.
Sam. I know how much work you did in not only instituting that in your own family, but helping so many other people with that as well. And so you are absolutely an expert in it, and I know it helped immensely for you guys. So
thank you, Lexi.
So such a great thing to be able to share that with others. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll get started with the nutrigenomics portion of that. So let me know if you see any challenges here with oops, it started from the beginning. Okay, I'll just head right into my section there. Yeah. Okay. So this statement, Sam actually got this quote from Nature magazine, and it's about the study of nutrigenomics. And people are like, well, what exactly does nutrigenomics mean? And this statement really sums it up nicely. But in its most simplest terms, nutrigenomics is the study of how food affects gene expression. All of the different molecules, bioactives, vitamins, minerals that are contained in food, and what effect they have on gene expression. And so it is a study that started about 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, when they sequenced the genome, and is really coming into its own. There's so much evidence now that we have that supports this idea that not only can the way your genes express affect how food is processed in your body, that would be nutrigenetics, but also how what you eat affects gene expression, and that's nutrigenomics. And so we'll go into a little bit of basics about genetics just to catch us up to speed, because I'm sure it's been a while since biology in high school for some of us, and if we don't do it every day, some of these terms might be tough to grasp. So what is a gene? A gene is just basically a instruction manual for how to build you. And so, for example, the gene sets out a code. It's written in just 4 letters, C, G, A, T. And those 4 letters spell out how to write proteins. And proteins in the body are used for all kinds of things. So, for example, a protein is a hormone such as insulin or cortisol or testosterone or estrogen. Also enzymes. Proteins are enzymes, like how you burn fat, how you burn protein, how you burn carbohydrate. All of those things are worked on by enzymes, and those are created with proteins. And so the body uses DNA and uses the code that's written in genes in order to create that instruction manual for how to build these things. And so a complete set of those genes that exist within an organ is called a genome. And the chromosomes, you get 23 pairs, one from mom and one from dad, are just ways of organizing all that data. So there could be hundreds to thousands of different genes on a single chromosome, and that is all organized, and that's what makes up your DNA. That's that whole instruction manual on how to build you. So going into what a genetic variance is, a genetic variance is another word for a more complicated word called single nucleotide polymorphism. And for short, people call that a SNP. And so single refers to a single letter change. Nucleotide refers to one of those four letters I was telling you about, C, G, A, or T. Poly means many, it affects many people in a population, and morphism just means a change. And so single nucleotide polymorphism is just basically a genetic variant. Since they've discovered and sequenced the genome, they've discovered over 1.5 million SNPs that are out there. And they've come to realize that not all SNPs are a negative thing. There can be SNPs that make somebody's eyes blue versus making somebody's eyes brown, or different blood types. There can be SNPs that are very, very impactful in terms of, like, for example, a deletion in one of those letters might cause cystic fibrosis, for example. Or it can be just a reduction in function where the enzyme or the hormone or the some other kind of cell just doesn't work as well. But what's interesting about SNPs is that you don't get to be called a SNP unless you affect more than 1% of the population. And so what scientists can do is take the SNPs that they figure out from people and compare that to, say, things like individuals' response to drugs. So for example, I have a SNP in my body's ability to process Versed. Versed is a drug they give you when you go through surgery. So if I tell the pharmacist at the time that I am going through surgery that I have this SNP, she's like, oh, I understand what that means. I know exactly what to do. I need to give you less Versed than I would give to somebody else. The first time I had a surgery was over 20 years ago, and they didn't know these types of things then. And I had a terrible time with Versed. It took forever to recover in the recovery room. I actually had to have a surgery a couple of years ago. The pharmacist knew exactly what I was talking about. I was able to tell her, and she was able to say, I got you. I can make a difference here in making that whole process better for you. So predicting an individual's response to drugs is one of the benefits of knowing SNPs, and one of the things researchers check out. Another thing is, and this is just another one of those examples, is your susceptibility to environmental factors, such as toxins. So somebody might have a SNP in their ability to detoxify certain things, like you might have a worse reaction to BPA in water bottles than somebody else might have. So those are just two examples. An allele has to do with how many copies of that SNP that you have. Remember, you get one copy from mom, one copy from dad. So if you have SNPs in both sets of instruction, then you are considered to be homozygous, which is more impactful than if the SNP you got from mom is considered a change, and the SNP, or you did not get the SNP from dad, and so then you have something called heterozygous, which is different. So a homozygous one might be more impactful than a heterozygous one. Alleles can result in different phenotypes, meaning observable traits, and so like I said before, it might not be an impactful SNP. So in the case of like blue eyes versus brown eyes, in order to be blue eyes, you've got to have two copies of the allele that goes for blue eyes. If you have one copy of the brown, one copy of the blue, then you're going to probably express as brown-eyed because brown eyes are dominant. And so that's an important distinction to know about whether you have one or two copies of the particular SNP that you have. So there's two also really important things to know about SNPs. The first one is a genome-wide association study called GWAS for short. And so scientists will study how often that SNP occurs in a population and whether or not that SNP can be associated with specific diseases or traits. And that helps them to figure out what kind of medicine could work better for somebody. And so that particular SNP that I had with Versed, it's called a CYP enzyme, and that particular CYP enzyme is 3A4, and that particular CYP enzyme detoxifies almost 50% of drugs from the body. And because I had a SNP there, then that can help that pharmacist give me the more correct dose of that particular medication. So it allows for precision medicine, knowing what those genome-wide association studies do. It predicts that kind of thing. The second term that needs to be explained is a polygenic risk score. So when they first figured out all of these different genetic SNPs, back 10 years ago, they were suggesting making really big interventions based on just one genetic SNP. And they've since come to realize that you could have multiple SNPs inside your body that do the same thing. And so they want to know, how many of these SNPs do you have that do this particular job? And how impactful is that going to be? And so you might have 30 different SNPs that affect your body's ability to detoxify something. And so knowing how many of those SNPs have 2 copies of the affected one and just 1 copy might change how generous your risk score is in changing how your body is going to express that. And so it really determines how impactful something is and how your likelihood of either developing disease or developing an inability to do a certain body process. So that leads us to genetics. And I'm going to move our faces off of this a little bit so you can see the whole screen. And so I love this example of the queen bee because it really explains what epigenetics means. In epigenetics' most simplest terms, it's the effect of the environment, and that environment includes diet, like Sam was talking earlier, your mental health with community and things like that, exercise, toxins, stress, everything that is in the environment that bathes your genes on genetic expression. So the important thing to know about epigenetics is it doesn't actually alter DNA itself. So it's not changing any of one of those 4 letters, G, T, C, and A. It's changing the effect of how those genes are expressed. And so this particular example of the queen bee, I included the study down below that talks about this in great detail if anybody wants to go in and check this out, because it's really a very cool study. But queen bees are born with the exact same identical set of genes as a worker bee. The only difference is that queen bees are selected out and they're fed a really specialized diet of something called royal jelly. And because the queen bees feed on this, they develop larger abdomens, and they also develop ovaries where they can then have babies. And so the researchers have found that royal jelly contains a substance that silences a key gene called DNMT3. The SNPs and the genes are named for what they do. And so this particular one, it's got a big old long name. It's called DNA methyltransferase 3. But basically, it's making specific DNA. When it's turned on, the queen genes are epigenetically silenced. When it's turned off, the queen genes activate, creating a queen. So there's 3 different ways that, more than 3 different ways, but 3 main ways that the body can perform epigenetic effect on genetic expression. And this particular one, it's called histone modification. So it affects the little protective forming parts that go around the DNA. There's also methylation is another way of performing epigenetics, and there's other ones. Acetylation is one, genetic imprinting is one. We go into all of this in our personalized nutrition course where we explain the genetic basics, but for today's purposes, I'm just going to introduce those briefly, but we could definitely go into those more in the Q&A if you want to. So that's the basis of the queen bee and what epigenetics is. And so some important takeaways from just the basics of genetics is just because you have a SNP does not mean it's going to be impactful, and doesn't mean that you're going to have a complete loss of function either. And so what we do with personalized nutrition is that we find out your SNPs, but then we also correlate that to what your body's actually doing. So we can take labs and see, are you having a problem with B12 or folate or one of the other methylating type of nutrients? We also don't want to judge a SNP in isolation. So just because you have one SNP in one place, we want a more complete report that actually looks at all the modifiable SNPs that are within a certain body system so that we can present a more meaningful result. And then another thing to keep in mind is that SNPs are not typically on and off, especially the genes that are modifiable by nutrition, though some can be, like our example of the cystic fibrosis. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about our personalized Fierce Foods class now that you have some the basis in terms. And so that's a pilot program that Sam and I started a year ago. And we're continuing to work on funding so that we can admit more people into the personalized Fierce Foods program. But it starts off with the basics of genetics, goes into some really important pathways to pediatric cancer families. That includes detoxification, inflammation, oxidative stress. And then it goes, one of the ways that we do that is we use a company by the name of 3x4 Nutrigenomics to do our nutrigenomics testing for us. There are probably about 20 different companies out there. I'm going to show you an example from 3x4 Nutrigenomics. You can see what their report looks like, but it just involves a cheek swab. And so that cheek swab is just Q-tip, put it in a specialized box, send it off to the company. It takes about 4 weeks to get results back. And then you get a 38-page report that identifies 135 different genetic SNPs. And it does so, the reason I like 3x4 so much is it does it in a really beautiful way of explaining the data. So it uses color for one thing, and it uses a dark purple for the most impactful SNPs, and then it breaks it down into all these body systems. So the purple on the top of the body system is the most impactful down to the least. And it also gives you a polygenic risk score for the top 3 impacted body systems. It does provide 3 diet, lifestyle, and supplement suggestions for every one of the impacted pathways. The thing that's important to know on the report that they use is that they don't know your child. They don't know what your child is doing in terms of different medications. They don't know, if your child has any kind of specific treatments on board that would be contraindicated with the supplements they're suggesting. So the diet and lifestyle, you can't go wrong with the suggestions at all, but we need to take those supplement suggestions and make sure that we pay attention to what your individual situation is. So just as an example of that, 2 common drugs I have listed there for you are utilized in cancer treatments. And the first one, which I always munch the pronunciation of irinotecan, I think it's pronounced, or irinotecan. You should not use probiotics, especially the lactobacillus probiotics, while you're taking that particular drug, because the probiotic, it won't let the irinotecan get out of the system when its action is done. It actually uncouples it and sends it back into the system, which can result in greater toxicity. Another example is the methotrexate. The whole focus and purpose of methotrexate is to shut down cell replication. And it does that by preventing folate from doing its job, a B vitamin in the body. And so a child should not be taking additional supplemental folate at the time they're using methotrexate. And so again, it's important to make sure that we take these supplement suggestions with a grain of salt and personalize them and tailor them to the specific patient. We also know that culinary medicine is always great for all populations. We know that good, healthy, whole food is the way to go versus the physiological doses that are in supplements. So we need lab evidence to say that this particular vitamin or mineral is deficient before we start loading up with a supplement form. The very, very cool thing about this personalized Fierce Food program is that the interventions that we're doing can epigenetically affect gene expression. And so if you have challenges in detoxification or challenges in oxidative stress, knowing those and knowing some culinary medicine tools to minimize those can minimize side effects. It can allow kids to stay in treatment longer and really improve outcomes that way. And we know that it can support healthy growth while a child is undergoing that. And I just went way too fast. There we go. So this next page shows you just a one-page example of what the page can look like that's delivered from the 3x4 nutrigenomics. These 4 pathways that are listed there are incredibly important for any pediatric cancer, any cancer patient anywhere. But as you can see, they use this form of color, and then they organize all the different various SNPs from most impactful to least impactful. The dark purple, the 2 copies of the allele, that's impactful. And then they take the whole entire polygenic risk score and they say, of all these 4 different pathways, methylation in this particular one is the most important, giving it a 1, down to inflammation, giving it a 2. And then we can define what each of these different various SNPs do, but then that polygenic risk score really leads us in a specific direction where we can make intervention, which is really nice. And so there's 36 pathways that are described like this, and the 38-page report, it gives you the color coding for all 135, and then it breaks it into body pathways, and then it breaks it into little graphics like this, which give information on how to deal with it. So I just wanted to give real quickly an example of 3 different SNPs that can occur in the methylation pathway, and talk about what they do, and then talk about what you can do from a culinary medicine perspective to counter that. And so, like I was saying before, all SNPs are named by what they do in the body. MTHFR is probably one of the most common genetic SNPs that's talked about out there in the media and other places. It's probably one of the first one that had a lot of evidence behind it to back it up as far as interventions that you can do. And what it does is it affects your body supply of both B12 and folate, along with many other things that it does, but that's one of the big ones. And so B12 and folate are important both in blood development and protecting the brain and brain growth. And if you have a SNP here, depending on how many SNPs you have in this particular one, it can affect your body's supply of these 2 important nutrients. And so we first would test your body to see where that, what your body's actually doing. And then if we needed to, we can judiciously supplement, or we can steer you towards foods that have more. Folate, for example, is dark green leafy vegetables. B12 is animal products. And so like a keto safe B12 would be eggs, for example. COMT is the next one there. It's catecholamine omethyltransferase. It's very important in methylating neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, and others. You can have a genetic SNP in this particular one that makes that action be slow or fast, so it breaks it down too quick, or it makes it stay around too long. And that can affect your body's ability to handle stress. You can have dopamine that stays in the receptor for a really long time, which is helpful if you're trying to do something hard like a math test or something like that and focus. But at some point, that dopamine needs to stand down to allow you to relax. And you can have SNPs there that can affect that. That's just one example of what that does. It does a whole lot of other things too. A PEMT SNP, and I won't spell out that whole name because I'll probably munch the pronunciation of that as well. But that is really important in producing choline, and choline is very important in a lot. It's implicated in a lot of cancers as well. And so abnormal methylation of that can affect cancer as well. And so knowing what that you have that SNP, and then doing a corresponding lab test to see what your body's actual expression of choline is can help us to see if we need to up food intake of choline, again, from eggs. Eggs is not #1 source, or we need to actually go in a supplement form. Again, back with the methylation, and also going back to the original wheel on the first couple of slides that Sam presented, is that there are lots of different factors that affect the body's ability to methylate. And those are all epigenetic influences on the body's ability, especially if you have SNPs in that particular region. And so dietary patterns, how much B12 and folate are you getting from your diet? What medications are coming in that the body has to really work hard on and get rid of that are using up a lot of your stores for the B12 and folate? And if you've already got a SNP there, does that affect that? how is exercise and rest? What level of inflammation going on? All of those things can affect methylation too. So when we talk interventions for knowing what your genetic SNPs are, those are some of the things we will address. This slide here is just a basics of culinary medicine that can provide those methylation factors that are needed when methylation is challenged. And just as an example, if you were an over-methylator and had SNPs that did that, and we did a lab test and showed that your B12 and folate were fine, then I would tell you that it probably was a wise idea for you to avoid methylated vitamins in your multivitamin. And then if you were an under-methylator, focusing on foods, supplements if necessary. So one of the things that we definitely try very hard to do in our precision culinary medicine, our Fierce Foods Academy program that Sam mentioned, is we try to come up with foods that are pleasing to kids, but also meet this really special nutrient availability to do some of these epigenetic changes. And so this is just an example of what these constituents are in food and how they can change things. So detoxification support, again, I did it, okay. It provides a constituent called sulforaphane, and sulforaphane can upregulate detoxification if you have some detoxification SNPs. In terms of methylation support, and specifically with the ketogenic diet, there you can get that dark green leafy vegetables, but you can also get them from these grain-free granola bars that are appropriate for a ketogenic diet. Nuts and seeds definitely supply those necessary items as well. And then chia pudding is a great one too, because you get those omega-3 fatty acids, which can help you with the inflammation and the oxidative stress pathways. And depending on how many strawberries you can have, depending on what level of ketogenic diet you need, those will provide some of those anthocyanins, ellagic acid, quercetin that are important for countering those SNPs in those areas too. So just to give you an idea of what we can do with culinary medicine, it is great to know this information, but then knowing how to get your kids to eat this certain foods is the complete other side of the coin there. And so knowing what to eat and translating that into actually eating is the difficult part. And that's one beautiful thing about our culinary medicine program. So it does provide the opportunity for parents and kids to come together in community and find out, you know, what are other people doing? What are different tips and tricks for getting my child to eat some of these foods, especially when they're challenged, more so than any other child, because they're going through treatment. So if they've got taste dysfunctions, or they've got sensory need issues, or they've got anatomical dysfunctions that make it more difficult for them to eat than anyone else, you know, what are some different things that we can use in our programs that are going to help with that? I have a copy of the culinary medicine Fierce Foods Kitchen cookbook that we have, and on every page of every recipe, you'll see, I'm not doing that very well, but there is kids can cook tips on every recipe. That will give kids a little bit more agency over the food they're eating. If the reason for the food rejection is behavioral, allowing kids a little bit more choice and being involved in the process is something that can really help them there. There's also suggestions in here if your child's not handling dairy right now because their gut is impacted from treatment. There's substitutions for dairy in there. There's also, like Sam was saying earlier, changes for, you know, you can make this more ketogenic by deleting this ingredient and ramping up on another. So that cookbook is the result of doing this culinary medicine program over the last 10 years. We have over 800 kid-friendly recipes that we've created, and 120 of the kids' favorites have made it into this book, and we hope to continue expanding on that. We're about to go into the second edition of our cookbook, and we also would love to bring it online and make it digital. But we've done these programs in the farm where kids can go in and pull vegetables out of the ground and then come and eat with it. So in making that exploration so valuable to them, where they can touch it and taste it and smell it. And then also having a little bit of good, you know, ribbing the kids next door saying, I ate it, you know, give it a shot type of thing. And so we know that there are all those different reasons of food aversion. So we can make referrals to different things like physical therapy or speech language pathologists if need to. But we also know it takes up to 16 tries to accept a new food. So just having that atmosphere where kids can try new things is so valuable. But we love to provide all kinds of adventurous tasting games and really helping the kids get to the meat of it themselves, to be involved in selecting those recipes. I love it when I see the kids, I see pictures online of the kids putting all these yellow sticky notes on all these different pages. I want to try this, I want to try this. And that just makes our heart sing when we're doing this. So, so that is our culinary medicine program. And we want to make it fun and make it a safe place for kids to experiment with these foods. And so that is something that we do as well at Max Love. And so this, I'm going to leave you with a study that goes into one of those CYP enzymes that I was talking about. This particular, I wanted to give you the reference article here if you wanted to go in and read the article. But this was one of the articles that showed that nutrients really can modify genetic expression on there. So there is quite a bit of scientific data supporting this idea, and we are so thrilled to be able to offer it at Max Love. There's a saying that says DNA loads the gun, but epigenetics pulls the trigger. And so knowing what your nutrition knowledge is, knowing what your SNPs are, can really provide tools that will alter the effect of epigenetics on gene expression and make change. And so I leave you with that statement. I don't know who actually said that statement the first time, but it is a common one that's used in the nutrigenomics world. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha, and we're going to finish it up and then go to Q&A with that.
Yeah, I'll leave this slide up for anybody. If you were to use that QR code, it would go to our application, our online application, where a lot of these resources are available to you free if you're a childhood cancer family, as well as our contact info if you do have any specific questions that you want to reach out and ask. Again, we are here for everybody, anybody listening. I know that this is a topic that can be confusing, and it can be,
Complex.
there can be multiple different things coming at you at once, right? And something we actively try to do at Max Love is make it in as science as possible, right? Because it with the inundation of all these ideas and unsolicited advice, sometimes you need to be able to concretely have reason to do something for your child that could help. So we're here for you and to answer any questions. Grace, I don't know if you have anything to add or.
No, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for bringing this to the DIPG community and to the cancer community as a whole. I think it fills a big gap for us, and it's fantastic to see families really benefiting off of this information and off of the recipes and really the more applicable aspects of this. But yeah, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, if anybody has a question, feel free to put it into the Q&A chat. We can answer some questions if there are any.
We've got two right now. I don't know if you want me to stop sharing. And then...
Yeah, maybe stop sharing and then we can answer these. But the first one, these are probably specific to you, Lexi.
Yes, thank you, Audra, for that.
Yeah, can we test for inflammation?
For inflammation. There are several different markers of inflammation in the body. The first, probably most used one, is something called CRP, which is C-reactive protein. It's a protein that the liver makes when you have inflammation in the body. The thing that's important to know about that, it's a non-specific marker. So you know that there's a degree of inflammation in the body, but you don't know exactly where it's coming from. There are other tests that you can do to check inflammation in the body in specific areas. There's something called HSCRP, which has to do with inflammation specifically related to cardiovascular events. But the most common one is that CRP marker. They can also test things like TNF alpha. They can test things like interleukins. So you can test IL-1 and IL-6, and those will give you numbers as well. But the most common one that's used is CRP. You want that number pretty low, less than 3, definitely. A lot of experts say less than 1. But when you get above 10, you know that level is extreme of inflammation in the body.
Awesome, thank you. And then Audra had another question of, how do you understand the state of your child's gut health?
That one's an excellent question as well. One of the most valuable ways, or at least precursors to knowing that there is something wrong in your child's gut. And let me preface that by saying that there have been huge studies done on the effect of treatment on a child's gut. There was even a study done on siblings that showed, that their gut microbiome diversity was very similar before treatment started. And then as treatment progressed and as treatment kept going, there was a huge loss of diversity in the child who was undergoing the treatment in their gut. So you can take a stool test and see that reduction in diversity. But one of the best ways, without even taking the stool test, is looking for different side effects that might be occurring. And so gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, reflux, all of those are definitely symptoms that the gut is not working as well as it should. And looking at stool is another really valuable way to see whether or not your child's gut is working. For example, if the stool floats in the toilet versus sinks, that's telling us that the body is not absorbing the fat that they're eating very well, because oil and water don't mix. So if stool floats, that's one of the ways. The color of the stool is also very important. If it was a very pale, almost gray-like color, that would mean we don't have enough enzymes on board to actually take the nutrients out of our food either. Or a black tarry stool would be indicating that there might be blood in the stool. If it's a frothy stool or particularly odorous, that also is a sign that you're malabsorbing some of the nutrients. And so all of those clinical signs and symptoms are things to watch and are really valuable insights to how the gut is doing. But you can take a microbiome stool test that will absolutely tell you as well. Sadly, a lot of those tests are not covered by insurance, so it could be an out-of-pocket fee to get that really detailed information. When you take a stool test with a GI, gastroenterologist, that is covered by insurance, they're usually just checking for really bad actors like H. pylori and parasites, things like that. But it doesn't really go into detail about the diversity of the gut microbiome. We know that the diversity of the gut microbiome is impacted. And so whether or not that's having an impact on your body's ability to run normal gut functions is going to express itself by one of those symptoms I already mentioned.
Awesome. All right, yeah, I don't see any more questions, but again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. Yeah. Anything else?
Thank you guys so much.
You're absolutely welcome.